Well, we're on to our next chapter of the Gifts of Imperfection. And I can't tell you how many times recently that phrase has popped into my head as things go askew and things don't run as we would necessarily hope them to, such as our PowerPoint slides didn't work for the first part of the sermon. So you see, it was all a plan. It was all to highlight our gifts of imperfection. But today's chapter in the book by Brené Brown focuses on cultivating a resilient spirit. So I commend Chris Arthey for his resiliency and his ability to let go of that numbing and powerlessness and became empowered and brought our screens up working again. Thank you. But that happens. That happens in life. Things don't always go as we would hope or plan. And now you're just getting smart alecky. Resilience. Brené Brown describes it as the capacity to stay mindful and authentic under great stress and anxiety, to transform trauma into wholehearted living. And I think we just witnessed that. We've all been in those moments in our lives when we wonder what the next step might be. We wonder how we could manage whatever the situation is that we find ourselves in. And more often than not, if you're anything like me, I used to think that I was really kind of free-flowing, easygoing, flexible, but I realized, no, I've got it all figured out in my head. I have sort of a sequence, a process, an anticipated outcome, and when things start to unravel, I start getting quite anxious. Now, the benefit that I have, I guess, is that I don't tend to show that anxiety on the external side of myself. I tend to keep it all in. My cousin nicknamed me the duck because he said that I'm like the duck that's floating across the top of the water tranquilly, just calmly, but beneath my little webbed feet are going. He even gave me a stuffed duck just to kind of hone in on his point. But I think there are, for all of us, times in our lives when we have to be resilient. We have to find a way to manage through whatever the circumstance is that we find ourselves in. And sometimes it can bring the best out in us, and sometimes it can bring out the worst. But the fact is, I think we all have our own stories of those times when we've had to be resilient. We've had to stay mindful, we've had to be true to ourselves, even in those moments of great stress and anxiety. And for those of us who manage through those kinds of periods in our lives, we realize the resilience, actually looking back on it, has gifted us in some way. Things perhaps didn't go the way we had expected them to, but that's part of that gift of imperfection. We realize there's something perhaps truer or deeper that comes out as a result of what we've experienced. So Brené Brown is a researcher, and she's done quite a bit of research about such things as resilience. And she identified what she calls protective factors, the things that we do, have, or practice that helps us to be resilient. Some people might say the ability to bounce back when something bad happens. So first of all, I'll just name the 5 that she highlights. They are, one of the factors, the first one is that we are resourceful and have good problem-solving skills. Yeah, I think we could identify with that. That makes sense. I found this one an interesting one because I don't think it's one that people would necessarily associate with somebody who is resilient. We tend to think of, well, if you're resilient, it means you're totally self-sufficient, capable, you can handle everything on your own. But in fact, the number 2 protective factor, the things that we do and have and practice that gives us resilience, is actually a person who is resilient, has those factors, is more likely to seek help. Isn't that surprising? Because don't you feel like when things are going down, you're like, I'm going to make this work. And you tend to hone in and dig deep and think, I can do this all myself. But the most resilient people are the ones that actually seek help. And I highlighted that one because I'm going to post it on my fridge door just as a little reminder to myself each morning. It's okay to ask for help. The third one is they hold the belief that they can do something that will help them to manage their feelings and to cope. So it's not even as if they're, again, thinking, oh, I'll just make it happen. I'll just make it work. They understand that it's not a hopeless situation. They understand that there is something that can be done, and they feel that they have the capacity to do it. Bit of a problem solver, too, I think. Also, the fourth factor for people who are resilient, they have a social support network available to them. They have a friend to call. They're in with a group or family who are supportive and caring around them, and that makes all the difference. I know for myself personally, different times in my life, I've always known that I've had the love and support of my family. And even if I didn't live with them, a phone call or taking me out for dinner for an evening or helping with the kids for an afternoon, all those things help me to be able to go forward in my plans and help me to be resilient in my life. And I think the fifth one that kind of is connected with the fourth one, people who are resilient are connected with others. They don't isolate themselves. They keep in touch, they keep in contact, they have a network and connection with people around them. And I think that's really important. So, number one, protective factors, resourceful, good problem-solving skills, more likely to seek help, believe that there is something that can be done to improve the situation. They have a social support around them to help, and they are connected with others, with family and friends. So that all makes sense. I get that. So I was reflecting on these factors of protective factors or resilience in relation to Mary. And I was thinking about Mary, and as we've mentioned, I think a couple of weeks ago, Mary and her circumstances, being a young woman in a society that had very strict social protocol, would not have been accepting at all for her to be pregnant and unwed. And even though she was with a very understanding fiancé who was protective of her in his own way, he was willing to divorce her quietly, not subject her to public shame, which would have been his prerogative in those days. He chose not to do that. He defended her, protected her as best he knew how. And yet Mary finds herself in this circumstance that in some communities would have had her killed or stoned, or at the very worst, totally isolated and alienated. And reading those factors about resilience, if you're banished and alienated and removed from your family, your village, your home, things get really difficult. So you can imagine that that's the case that Mary would have been facing. But instead, she has surrounded herself with a caring gentleman who had a broader understanding of the circumstances thanks to a visit from an angel. And we have Mary willing to connect with other family, her cousin Elizabeth. So she reached out to get some help and support. She had a network of people that she was able to connect to at that time of difficulty, and she was able to seek that out. And in that partnership, that sharing of her burden and her situation, she was able to share with Elizabeth. That gave her a sense of hope, and she understood that there's something positive that's going to come out of all of this. I have the support around me. I have the belief that I can do something that will make this situation better. So there's Mary and Elizabeth expressing what Brené Brown would refer to as those protective factors, those means of being resilient. Now, with all of Brené Brown's research, she found it really interesting that beyond those factors, there was also a key to people who experienced resilience in their life. And I found this kind of interesting as well. She said that the foundation of these protective factors, this resilience, was in fact spirituality. It was more than just resilience on its own. It had to do with spirit. She said spirituality was in fact the foundation of resilience. Now, she was quick to say this involved people that were connected with an organized religion and also those that weren't. This was not just related simply to people who were involved in a Christian community, but there were people involved in mosque or temple, just people that had an awareness and a foundation in their lives that there was a being, a spirit greater than themselves, and that they were connected to that and connected to one another. And so Brene Brown shares this description. She said, spirituality is recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected to each other by a power greater than all of us, and that our connection to that power and to one another is grounded in love and compassion. Practicing spirituality brings a sense of perspective, meaning, and purpose to our lives. So you can really appreciate where having that kind of a foundation when the going gets tough becomes really important to realize you're not alone. There is a power greater than yourself at work here. And that whole sense of connectedness is based on a sense of compassion and love for one another and ourselves. So I was thinking about that in terms of some of the events that have been happening in our world lately. And of course, I would be remiss to not bring up the latest Time magazine cover, the Person of the Year. And I thought, well, these women here, those they're referring to them as the silence breakers, the voices that launched a movement, I thought, well, there's a modern-day example of resilience in our lives today. They are a group of women who had no connection, really, prior to the experience of being sexually harassed in their workplace, and the courage to come forward and voice complaints against those that were their harassers or abusers. And I thought, well, they really are an example or a model of those protective factors as well. They realized that they were resourceful. They had a means, they had a voice. They were able to use social media, and they used good problem-solving skills. The fact that the one woman, I think it was, Ashley Judd went to a media outlet to out on Weinstein, and she was sort of the start of that. So she had the courage to do that. She knew she had the skills that she could go forward. They sought help. They sought help and support from one another. They believed that there was something that could be done about their situation. They were not going to be silenced anymore. And they believed that they had the support available to them. They had a sense that their voices were not single or solo, but they were a part of a whole community that could share together. And through that connection with others, family, friends, co-workers, other sufferers of that harassment, they found a voice. And I thought the whole expression, #MeToo, to me was the epitome of resilience, to recognize that you're not perfect, things aren't necessarily going your way, but you have a sense that you deserve something better in your life, that this isn't the way things should be, and that you have the courage and the voice to step forward and say something about it. And I saw that same kind of resilience in Mary and Elizabeth, and I thought, well, if they tweeted in their day, they could probably have joined their voices to that #MeToo to each other. They both identified the situation that they were sharing, and they had that connection with one another. There's another person that I was thinking of, and before I talk a little bit more about her, there are some other factors of resilience that I think are worth raising here. Hope. If you think of being a resilient person, I think you think of being a hopeful person because you believe in the possibility that something's going to get better. And sometimes we can think, oh, well, that's just kind of, oh, they're always that kind of Pollyanna-ish, they're always looking at the bright side of things. Their cup's always half full. But in fact, through Brene Brown's research, she realized that in fact, hopefulness is not something that you're just given. It's actually something that you learn and cultivate in your life. So if you say, oh, I'm not that kind of person, you could be. That's a bit of a cop-out. You can learn to be hopeful. Hopeful is a learned skill. It's an ability to see the situation and believe that you have the means to do something to change whatever situation you're in. And that could be tough sometimes. Sometimes we're comfortable where we are. I remember back in the day, early on when I was a single parent and I had my 2 young children, and I was going into different areas in my life, different groups, meeting different groups of people. And so inevitably we get around the circle, you had to introduce yourself. Oh, hi, I'm Susie, I'm a this, and I'm George, I'm a that, and oh, yes, I'm Galen, and yeah, I'm a single mom, and immediately you hear the, oh. And I got to tell you, there were times when that was a really helpful, because I thought, they get me, they understand what I'm going through. But after a little while, hearing that, made me feel a little uncomfortable. Because I thought, I'm not just a single mom. I'm so much more than a woman that's kind of struggling with her 2 kids right now. I'm a daughter, I'm a student, I'm a prospective United Church minister. There was just so many more things in my life that I realized I didn't want to be defined by this kind of victim label. And so I stopped introducing myself that way. So I think there's something conscious that we can do in terms of that resilience, that we have something. It's not just, I missed that, that gene in the whole, birthing lineup thing. No, I think that's a bit of a cop-out. I think we have some say in what we do in our lives and how we respond to situations. And hopefulness is something that we can cultivate, that we can work on. And so if you're not feeling hopeful on a certain day, there are things that you can do to kind of get yourself out of that. And one of the best things to do to be a little more hopeful in your own life is to maybe reach out and do something helpful to another that might bring hope into theirs. So it's certainly something that is manageable, and I've certainly had my share of days when I haven't felt hopeful. But there's something about a sense that you know where you want to go, and you have a plan of how you're going to get there, and you have a belief that that is possible. That is a way of helping you with hopefulness in your life. It's a way of setting goals and setting up an opportunity to prove yourself right. That yes, hey, I can do this. It can be a learned behavior, and it can be stronger and stronger the more you act on it. Another part of resilience is critical awareness. I think sometimes to be resilient, it's so easy to be vulnerable to other people's opinions. Oh, I don't know how you're ever going to get out of that hole. I just can't imagine what it would be like to try to overcome those obstacles. You just stay where you are, honey. You're just fine. You don't need to work any harder. That maybe is not the best words for you to be hearing at a moment like that. So resilience sometimes is about kind of tuning out some of those negative messages or ideas that are put in your direction. Oh, honey, you couldn't possibly pursue a career in modeling. You're not skinny enough. Oh, you don't have enough talent to be an NHL player. Whatever it is, we've all heard those things, whether we're young or older, things that other people give us their opinion. And we can choose to take that or to prove them wrong. I used to always say with my daughter, tell her what she can't do, she'll have it done by the end of the day. Some people are just like that. But sometimes it helps us to know that to be critical in our awareness of things that are being said or about us or the situation, to realize, well, it's not necessarily factual unless we believe it to be. So let's do our best to live out the way we feel that we're being authentic and true to ourselves, sometimes despite what other people say. My husband has a favorite saying, careful who you give your scorecard to. Right? Be careful who you give your scorecard to. You innately know in yourself what is good and best about you, so trust in that and act on that. I think the last other component to resilience is letting go. It's what Brene Brown calls letting go of numbing and taking the edge off vulnerability, discomfort, or pain. None of us wants pain. I think that's pretty clear. Hands up if you look forward each day to a painful experience. We don't. And if we see it coming, boy, we can be really good about avoiding it. Right? We can just hightail it out of that room or that conversation so fast. But sometimes a little bit like an injury or a wound, if we don't address it, sometimes it can get worse. It can fester. It can pop up in places we didn't expect it to. And that can be more damaging in the long run. So sometimes it's really important that we face that pain, that sense of vulnerability. I'm really hurt by the fact that you've said this about me or to me. Or that reminds me of a painful episode in my own childhood. We need to talk about this. There's so many ways that we'd rather just push that stuff aside. But if we don't face that pain, we're going to find other ways to cover it up, and they will, in the end, do more harm to us than if we were a little more brave and courageous and faced whatever that pain was that we were trying to avoid. I was a figure skater when I was growing up, born with a club foot, had a weakness on that leg, so the doctor said, oh, put your daughter in skates. That would be a great way for her to strengthen her leg and her foot. And so from the time 4 and a half, I started skating till I was a teenager. And let me tell you, I used to kind of say falling wasn't so bad in figure skating, because I always figured you landed on ice, and ice tends to be kind of slippery. So it wasn't like hitting pavement, it wasn't like, when they hit the basketball court and there's just like this, and they're kind of stuck to that flooring, right? At least I figured if you fell in skating, you kind of hit the ice and slid, right? Unless you went into the boards, that's another story. But for the most part, I would say falling in figure skating was, if you had to fall on a sport, maybe that would be the one to fall in. But regardless, there were a certain jump that I used to have to try to do, and I had to do it going backwards off of an outside edge. And let me tell you, I would just like, wait. I did not want to leap in the air on that jump because I failed so many times and it hurt. Every time I went down on that same hip. And once you bruise that one hip and then you keep falling on that same hip, it was painful. But I had to keep doing it because I knew if I didn't, I'd never know that I could actually land that jump. And life is like that sometimes. We're not looking for the pain, but sometimes growing or learning is painful. And if we don't go through that, then we're never going to be the person that we were meant to be. And I think as a parent, there's nothing worse than seeing our children going through painful growing processes. And all we want to do is protect them and stop the hurt and help them to avoid that pain. There's a great expression now, the helicopter parents. We'd like to hover. And we're just ready to swoop in with the slightest little pain or discomfort that we see our little 21-year-old at university experiencing. Come on, dear, I'll take you back home. We'll take good care of you. If we don't let our children stumble and fall, if we don't let ourselves feel a little bit of pain, we're not going to be the people we have the potential of being. And when we go through those episodes and come out at the other end, we realize, hey, I'm stronger than what I thought I was. I'm more capable than I knew I could be. Wow, I really did that. That resilience builds us up to be the people we were meant to be. I think that overall, to be resilient really is about moving into that person that you were born to be, that authentic self, that you are able to fulfill your greatest potential. I think of the women, people of the year. I think of Mary and Elizabeth. I think of even a young woman who, I don't know if any of you have heard of Maud Lewis. Have you seen the movie that was recently put out about her? Born in Nova Scotia, born with a disability. She was crippled, managed to go to school, but used to have to be taken into school from the back of the room after all the other kids were sitting down, so she didn't have to have the embarrassment of having the other children watch her try to walk in to her desk, if you can imagine. But lovingly cared by her family, lived at home till her mother's death, and was staying with an aunt, and just felt, even though her body had its limits, her mind was bright and creative and intelligent, and she needed a place where she felt she could reach her potential. And so she ventured off on her own and married a gentleman in the community and lived in this tiny hut of a house that was half the size, maybe a quarter of the size of this chancel here. And she painted. She painted everything she could get her paintbrush on. Her walls, her windows, her toaster, the stove front. And she became famous for her beautiful folk art. But once asked what gave her such joy in what would seemingly be a dismal and austere existence, she just remarked, I find joy in a paintbrush and paper and a window to look out of. If all we could do is find joy in that, I thought, what a resilient spirit. And then she ended up being renowned for her artwork. This tiny little woman that people would have just walked by and not given a second thought to. But what resilience she showed. Her ability to see what her potential was and believe in herself and naysay all those who didn't believe that she could do anything with her life. She rose above all of that and created this network and community of friends and connections through her art and lived a full and beautiful and joyful life. May each of us find that resilience in our own lives, based on our belief that we are not alone, that a loving and grace-filled God is with us each and every moment, and that when we struggle and we feel our pain, that we can reach out and connect and seek help and believe that we have the power to be what we need to be, and we will be blessed in that resilience through that Spirit. Amen.